The claims, views, and opinions expressed are those of the speaker and do not represent those of Budweiser Media or its partners. All subjects are innocent until proven guilty. This is a podcast about difficult topics, and it may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
There are questions about how the Washington Parish Sheriff's Office handled a death investigation that has become a years-long unsolved case.
The family hopes new eyes on the case will help bring some closure.
A murder mystery hangs near the intersection of Washington and Main Streets in Franklinton, Louisiana. The sign on the brick wall with Donna Arsenault's picture is only a few months old, but the mystery surrounding her death has hovered over this small town for years.
11:58 p.m. 42nd October 23, 2017.
She told everybody, if anything ever happens to me, one of them would.
I wasn't 3 minutes out when they called me, and I got over there, and I said, there's already an attorney here.
The minute I went in the house, I felt just this overwhelming feeling of danger.
There was a couple blood drops I noticed outside of the bedroom, so why would that be there?
When we went to go clean the house out, there was still a big smear of blood on that back door.
Donna was a very beautiful, sexy woman. Everybody had the hots for her. What she did is her business. She didn't deserve to be killed.
If you want to commit murder and get away with it, the place to do it is Washington Parish.
911 was your emergency.
Hey, we've got the body. We've been worried all day.
Where's this at now?
What's the address? 21229 Highway 16. Please come through.
Okay.
Just before midnight on Monday, October 23, 2017, 40-year-old single mom and well-known cosmetologist Donna Arsenault was found lying on her bedroom floor with a fatal gunshot wound to her lower left breast. Authorities announced she had committed suicide, and the local newspaper ran that headline, but her autopsy was indisputable. She was murdered. After more than 6 years of uncertainty, the case remains unsolved. But what I know for sure about my hometown is that information is currency, local gossip never sleeps, and secrets aren't sacred.
I'm feeling heavy, there's a pounding in my chest. The shadows hiding, but I see the silhouettes. Fear lives in the quiet, whispers in the silence.
I'm Tucker Simmons, and this is Freeze Frame, an investigation into the unsolved murder of Donna Arsenault. When I think of the word hometown, I imagine those cheesy Christmas movies set on Main Street, USA. You're guaranteed a fairy tale ending. Maybe those kind of small towns exist somewhere, but as I've been reminded recently, that's not the reality in my hometown. Through fields of pine trees, past dozens of churches, just 70 miles north of New Orleans is Franklinton, Louisiana. Population 3,593. Franklinton is the parish seat of Washington Parish. We call it Louisiana's toe of the boot. Our first claim to fame dates back to the 20th century when the Goodyear family built the world's largest sawmill in Bogalusa, 20 miles east of Franklinton. These days, it's known for hosting the country's largest free fair that welcomes hundreds of thousands of visitors every October. Growing up there was pretty normal. My dad's side of the family was in the clothing business. My mom's family had jewelry stores. My brother and I spent our days terrorizing the neighborhood on bikes and go-karts. We were privileged and mostly unaware of the outside world. After high school, I moved away to Los Angeles and built a career in television. For 10 years, I developed and produced hundreds of reality TV shows. But in 2020, after a decade of telling other people's stories, I realized there was a story back home that needed to be told.
Where do you think the drugs around here come from? That is your man.
I've met so many people in jail that was in there because of that piece of shit. He was fucking their girlfriend, and then he planted dope on her.
When he would get involved with something, it would be for political reasons. I would have to find ways to work around him.
They'll just say and do anything, and they get away with it. They're godless.
The FBI showed up at my doorstep, and then the investigation really started heating up.
You name it, I've heard it. Community leaders having swinger parties, politicians covering up their friends' misdeeds, drug traffickers masquerading as pastors, and even crazy rumors about my own grandparents' business dealings. I'll admit, it's been tempting to omit names and pass over parts of the story that might not sit well with people I've known my entire life. But that's exactly how we ended up here in the first place. Since the beginning of this journey, I've often been asked if I consider myself a journalist. I guess in some ways I am. But this story is deeply personal, and as you'll hear, I won't be hiding my opinions. Rumors about my family are something I never really talked about. I would hear things, and kids at school would joke about what my grandparents really did for a living. But it was always just talk. So early on in this investigation, for the first time ever, I asked my grandma for her thoughts on all the speculation. Here's Mimi.
Yes, there's been rumors at times about the Mosleys because we drove nice cars, had a beautiful home. But it was because of hard work. It wasn't because of anything illegal. We just dismissed any of that. Some people can't understand that if you work hard, you may reap some benefits. I mean, that's the way it is, you know.
I have to say, if she and Pops were involved in nefarious business, they did a damn good job of hiding it. But it's a tricky situation because to maintain the integrity of this investigation, I couldn't just take her word for it. And I didn't. After months of investigating, reading court transcripts, interviewing locals, talking to childhood friends who were in the know, Washington Parish wasn't looking so sleepy after all. I've lost count how many times I've been told to stop poking around or, dude, just leave it alone. I've even been told a few times if I'm not careful, I might end up in a ditch somewhere. I'm not really sure what that means. Is it a threat? For many locals, though, the fear of retaliation is palpable, even in my own family.
Just be careful. Let me go with you, maybe.
I'm your mom. I mean, I just want you to be safe, honey.
I thought a lot about whether to include this next phone call. I had it early on in this investigation, and it's not directly related to Donna's case. But ultimately, I felt like you needed to hear an example of how locals have been manipulated and intimidated into silence. This is an excerpt of a woman from a prominent family in Washington Parish who was unhappy with my curiosity about her father.
It takes a golly man to ask those things about. And unbeknownst to you, I was listening to you because I was on another line listening to you. I don't even know how this happened today, but you fell in my hands. And, you know, I was your pawpaw's friend. I was Buck Mosley's friend. He hugged me every time he saw me. You know, I know. You know I know everything. I don't know what you up to. You may be in California, but nobody can run and hide.
I have a pretty good idea, but I'll let you decide what was being implied there. One of my best sources had gone silent. Pending records requests were piling up. I was hitting dead end after dead end. Late one night, I was venting to my brother, who still lives in Franklinton. And he reminded me of a local detective who had tried to reach me years earlier about an unrelated case. With some quick sleuthing online, I found a few numbers, and to my surprise, the third time was the charm.
Let me step outside. I'm doing homework with granddaughters. All right. So what can I do for you?
Well, I'm working on a story about Louisiana, and I was just curious if you were still in law enforcement or what you were up to.
I actually retired last year. I had enough. I tried to make 30 years, but I made 29 years, 1 month, 3 weeks, and 1 day.
Oh, wow.
Wait, don't wow on me yet.
That's retired Washington Parish Sheriff's Office Detective Demetria Rice. She goes by Demi or Mama D. She's worked all types of cases in her career, but she's most well known for her work as the lead child sex abuse investigator in the parish. Almost an hour into our wide-ranging conversation, Demi called attention to the cases that still haunt her. To my surprise, Donna Arsenault was among them.
I knew I could do it, and it took me to badger them to let me have a crack at it.
I could hardly believe what I was hearing, and I just couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant to be. Because what I haven't shared with you yet is that Donna Arsenault was my aunt. The reports that Donna committed suicide never set well with me, but what could I do about it? Eventually, as enough time passes, you start to convince yourself that there's nothing to see here. And I guess that's where I was at. I had lost touch with Donna other than the occasional Facebook message, but she was family, and if she was murdered, I knew I had to do what I do best, and that's tell her story.
My name is Bubba Mosley. Donna and I were married on October 6, 2001. She was funny. She had a heart of gold. We had a great time together.
The Mosley boy had scored the most beautiful woman in Washington Parish, and their marriage was the talk of the town. Everyone loved Aunt Donna. She was in her mid-20s, not too much older than us. The bond was instant, and we gained 2 new cousins, her boys Scott and Brennan. Their whirlwind romance was short-lived and ended in 2004, but they always remained in contact, and eventually Donna remarried and had her daughter in 2006. I shared some of this with Demi as she reflected on the case, not knowing the floodgates were about to open. Donna was my aunt. She was married to my mom's brother.
Oh, darling, how much time you got? In fact, while we're speaking, let me put a cup of coffee on because it's going to be a long conversation.
As you can tell, Demi is as outspoken as they come. After so much innuendo and speculation during my initial investigation, her brutal honesty was refreshing. But I need to be clear. These are Demi's opinions based on her time working the case, and some of it is very shocking. I always found it somewhat suspicious that she killed herself.
She didn't kill herself. She was killed. She was murdered. I begged for them to let me get involved in that case. Finally, they gave it to me after nobody could do nothing, and I found so many problems based on the way it was handled.
I got the investigation almost a whole year afterward. You know, I'm building my trust up with a suspect, and a few weeks into it, they just wanted it closed. They want him to come in and give a confession. Well, when he refused, they pulled it. There was no way I could have done a proper investigation in a matter of a few weeks.
If you're anything like me, I know what you're thinking. Here we go again with the law enforcement cover-up theory. My first thought was, maybe she's just disgruntled and slinging mud, so I asked.
I've been very vocal how I feel about the sheriff's office and the leadership there and the ones in charge. I don't want you to take my word for it. I want you to go out and do your own investigation, your own research, and you'll find what I'm saying is the truth.
I don't know what I expected her to say, but if she was trying to mislead me, wouldn't she have doubled down? I wasn't even calling about Donna's case, but here I am, sitting on what feels like a gold mine of information. Demi lives about 13 miles outside of town, so while I was home to see family not too long after our first phone call, I stopped by. Oh, how are you?
Wretched as always.
This meeting with Demi was much like our first conversation. She stated her opinions loud and clear. She references Tom, who was captain of criminal investigations at the Washington Parish Sheriff's Office at the time of Donna's death. He retired in January of 2023 after a 27-year career with the office, serving under 6 different sheriffs.
I got a phone call at 2:30 in the morning from Tom Anderson. I'm like, Tom, we forgot I'm out of town. 2 days later, went to Donna's house. And they were telling me how everything happened. If you're standing at the bed facing the headboard, the gun was to the left side. Donna's body was off of the bed on the right side with her foot. It pulled the covers off the bed. There was an outline of something on the bed that had a blood pattern around it.
Demi explained that whatever was on the bed creating the bloody 90-degree angle was gone, never found. So if Donna committed suicide, what happened to the object on the bed? It's pure speculation at this point, but doesn't that suggest someone else could have been there? At this point, I was hoping Demi could dig up some old files about the case, and I was checking in pretty frequently. Each time, more and more troubling details.
Obviously, the body was gone by the time you got there 2 days later, but did you go in and see, like, the blood that was still there?
There was blood on that bed, but there's very minimal blood. There was very minimal blood where she was at on the floor. But there was blood in the bathroom when the state police went back the second time and did the luminol search.
What more do you need? Right there. She sure enough didn't. Oh, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to cuss. There's no way she could have got off the bed, went in the bathroom, bled out, and then cleaned up the mess with a bullet going through the heart. The coroner said she might have lived a minute and a half after being shot. And the captain pretty much, she had time to do all that.
I have to be honest with you. I was feeling way in over my head. Looking back, I probably was. I'm not an investigator, but as a TV producer and a documentarian, the one thing I did know is I couldn't pass up this story. I checked in with Uncle Bubba to let him know what I was working on, and I was curious when he last saw Donna.
And I don't know how much you were in touch with her, but she was in
She
dire...
called me the week before and asked me for $2,000 to pay her house to get it caught up or she's going to lose it. Well, I'd loaned her money since I divorced her. And sitting in the fairgrounds, right there by Bowling Green Kitchen, and she asked me for $2,000 and I told her I couldn't do it. And she started crying and I said, Donna, I'm sorry. I can't do it. That was the last time I saw her. No, I saw her the Friday night of the fair, walking around with that guy, and she wouldn't even talk to me. She stood behind him and would put her face into his armpit area and stay secluded.
Tragically, just 3 days later, Donna was dead. A couple of sources around town had also mentioned Donna's financial struggles and said her estranged boyfriend bought her home 2 months before her death. Donna told Bubba and several others that as soon as she caught up, she would get it back. That didn't sit well with Donna's closest friends, who knew she had grown up in extreme poverty and took pride in being a homeowner. Plus, it wasn't just her home. Her thriving day spa had operated in the converted sunroom for many years. Investigators have never contacted Uncle Bubba, and he didn't know any details about the case. But he did get me in touch with Donna's older sister, Sherry.
You know, and at this point, it's not even about just Donna.
It's like they were almost trying to cover up what they messed up, trying to write stuff down as it was happening and as I would find out different things and hear different names and things like that. So, yeah, I would be very willing to sit down with each other. Absolutely.
Okay. Why don't we plan for 4?
Okay, that sounds great. 4 o'clock.
Okay.
I'll text you my address right now, Tucker.
A few days later, I made the 7-hour drive from Nashville to Franklinton to meet Sherry and her husband, Pat.
Hi, Pops. Hi.
How is it that my dogs did not?
How are you?
Come on in.
How you doing?
This
Hi
is
there.
Tucker.
Pat.
This is my
Nice to
husband.
meet you.
Sherry had just gotten home from picking up kids at school, Pat was in his recliner, and a fresh litter of puppies were down the hall. We caught up on life and shared reality TV stories about Pat's time on the hit CMT series Party Down South, and then we jumped right in. There was no question that Sherry and Pat never believed Donna committed suicide. Their first red flag was a series of early morning text messages sent from Donna's phone the day she was found.
Donna texted how many people that night? 4 or 5 people. How many months after this happened, I went and talked to them in the sheriff's office. They didn't even know about this. I'm like, you don't know about it.
I think what happens, I don't think Donna texted
No,
anyone.
we don't think it was.
I think it was somebody used her phone at that point. All it said was, I love you. And that's not Donna. She never wrote, I love you, and it was always lowercase. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And this was capital I, capital L, capital Y.
What did you think when you got that message?
I didn't get it till that morning because my phone's on silent during the night. So at like 6 o'clock in the morning, I think it was 6:30 or something. I texted her back and was like, what's going on? And she never texts back, obviously, because she's already gone at that point.
6 years have passed and life must go on, but Sherry's confusion and anger were still crystal clear.
I kept like just getting the runaround, and somebody was telling me, well, they're going to say that she committed suicide. And I'm like, why are they saying she committed suicide? Like, how? First off, the paper was saying that she's found in the bed with the shotgun, right? That's what the newspaper said, which is a big fat lie. She's on the floor, and the gun's on the other side of the bed, and there was droplets all the way from that back door all the way into her bedroom. But they're saying that it's a suicide.
But my thing was, how could a sheriff's office release a report to a media that she was committed suicide with a shotgun? There's a big difference between a shotgun and a pistol weapon.
We called the newspaper and wanted them to print a retraction. And they said they couldn't print a retraction unless the sheriff's office told them that they could.
Online sources did publish a shocking amount of false information about the scene. The weapon used was a shotgun, Donna was in bed, the weapon used was never found, and I could go on. But after reviewing the Air Leader's archives at its Franklinton office, I found no mention of a shotgun or the placement of Donna's body in the 3 articles it published about the case. It did, however, run this headline on February 7th, 2018. October 24 shooting death of Franklinton woman is ruled a suicide. The article stated, quote, the initial autopsy was inconclusive, authorities said. With no cause of death released, the case sparked considerable concern in the Franklinton area. However, authorities in the Washington Parish Sheriff's Office said this week that the most recent autopsy results show it to be a suicide, and it has been officially ruled as such, end quote. This appeared in the paper 3 months after a preliminary autopsy found Donna's manner of death to be homicide. The editor of the Air Leader is a man named Steve Cooperstock. Mr. Steve is an old friend of my dad's, and my brother played Little League Baseball with his son. We exchanged a series of lengthy off-the-record emails about Donna's case, and I eventually received this on-the-record statement.
In working with that particular WPSO administration for the previous 6 years prior to February 2018, we had consistently received accurate information in response to all of our queries. Until February 18th, I cannot point to a single query, not one, ask of that particular WPSO administration that resulted in a miscommunication or even confusion. so we had no hesitation in publishing the WPSO response that the death was apparently a suicide.
It's not uncommon for a medical examiner and investigators to disagree on a case, but that's not the issue here. The suicide announcement was given to the paper before Donna's family was notified, before the autopsy was even completed, and while homicide investigators were actively working the case. This has all contributed to the public's speculation of a cover-up. The Era Leader has limited resources, just like any other community paper, and that has to be taken into account. But the fact remains, there was only one autopsy and one set of results, which found Donna's manner of death to be homicide. A death certificate confirming those findings was issued on September 10, 2018. The Era Leader has never corrected the record for the community or Donna's family. I've thought a lot about why he may not have printed that retraction. And so far, Mr. Steve hasn't directly answered that question. But if I were to speculate, a small paper contradicting the local sheriff's office would likely damage its access to information it relies on to fill the pages of its publication. I respect the service Mr. Steve provides for the community, and I personally have fond memories with him from childhood. But saying I'm disappointed in the way the paper has handled this case is an understatement.
The person you are trying to reach is not accepting calls at this time. Please try your call.
I've been told Chief Criminal Deputy Mike Haley, who retired from the Washington Parish Sheriff's Office in 2022, acted as the public information officer and provided the improper statement to the Era Leader. All attempts to reach Mr. Haley have been unsuccessful. Okay, so I know I sound obsessive about this article, but it was a pivotal moment in the investigation. Whether intentional or not, it shifted the public's attention away from the case. Here's Franklinton Police Chief Justin Brown, who explained why that can be a death sentence.
Ultimately, it boils down to pressure. If it's in the news or it's being publicized or the questions are constantly being asked, then it brings that case to the forefront and it demands action. You know, it's an injustice for our community. It's an injustice for the family and an injustice for Donna.
By early 2019, Sherry and Pat had lost faith in the investigation. They called a family meeting with her brother TJ, Donna's ex-husband, who was the father of her daughter, and a few others. It was decided Pat would meet with Sheriff Randy Seal to suggest it would be in his own best interest, due to the upcoming election, to ask the state police to take over the case. Following that meeting, the Louisiana State Police Criminal Investigations Division agreed to take Donna's case, and later that year, as expected, Randy Seal was reelected to his third term.
It was March the 11th, 2019. It was on a Monday. And it said, I text Randy Seal and asked why Tom Anderson still had Donna's case files on his desk for over 2 weeks. Okay, and I'm going to tell you, I got the information because another person called me and said, Sherry, case files still have not been turned over. I said, well, I'm going to call the sheriff. He said, oh, yeah, they've been turned over. They were turned over last week. And I said, no, sir, they're not. I said, they're sitting on Tom Anderson's desk right now as we speak. And he said, are you sure? And I said, 100% sure. And about 15 minutes later, he calls me back and says, Sherry, you were right. They're sitting on the desk. He said, but I'm calling the state police myself right now. And I said, okay. So on March the 14th, Tom Anderson goes into the office, makes a big to-do, makes everybody go in and sit down. He's having a meeting because there is a leak. And he is mad about it. There's a leak. How did they know that those papers were sitting on my desk?
I can understand why the lead investigator would be upset about a leak within his department. But what took so long to hand over the case file to the state police? And why did it take the victim's sister raising a red flag for the sheriff to know what was going on in his own office? Before arriving at Sherry's that day, I called the Washington Parish Coroner's Office, where I had called many times before, and I finally reached his secretary and chief investigator to request a copy of Donna's autopsy. It didn't sound promising, but this was long before any news of my investigation went public, so I had hope. And sure enough, when I left Sherry's, there it was in my inbox. Within hours, my request for Donna's autopsy was approved. I was hesitant to open it. I was excited, of course, But what did this really mean? I was suddenly questioning everything. Is there really anything I can do to positively impact this case? Why me? Why should I be the one to do this? If I'm not fully committed to solving it, why would I ever want to see this kind of detail about a loved one's death? I could read the first several lines of the document's thumbnail before I even opened it. And there it was. Manner of death. Homicide. Donna's family, my family, the entire community, they had been lied to for years about Donna's death. And in that moment, every reservation I had fell away. I felt a sense of responsibility. That night, I called several sources close to the investigation, and Demi was the only one willing to go on the record.
I just got the autopsy from the coroner's office. I know you've seen it, obviously, and I'll need to read through it to really understand completely, but the big takeaways at first glance, at 9:30 a.m. on October 25th, which is less than 36 hours after the 911 call, Dr. Tafada performed the autopsy. Cause of death, gunshot wound to the left chest. Manner of death, homicide. And then he goes on to say 2.5 inches left of the midline and 9 inches from the top of the shoulder. So it's pretty clear, that it says homicide.
Correct.
So I guess my confusion is, how is it that the sheriff's office announced to the paper that it was officially a suicide in February, 3 months later? Were you guys not made aware of this autopsy?
No, we were made aware the day of the autopsy that it was a homicide. The day after the autopsy was performed, I was told by one of my fellow detectives, well, actually two of them, came in my office to tell me. The captain, Tom Anderson, even before he arrived on scene, called and said it was a suicide. And when he got on scene, they argued about it.
Those other two detectives, what were their names?
Raymond Myers and Jimmy Seals. Raymond Myers was very adamant that it was a homicide.
Raymond Myers was promoted to captain of criminal investigations in January 2023, following Tom Anderson's retirement. Captain Myers has not agreed to speak with me yet, but retired Detective Demi Rice and others with intimate knowledge of the initial investigation, who you'll hear from in future episodes, are hell-bent on correcting what they see as a lack of transparency in Washington Parish. I took a few weeks to pore over all the details, and the bottom line is, having the case be unsolved is bad enough. There's a murderer walking the streets of Washington Parish. But then when you add what certainly looks like a deliberate attempt to mislead the public, with no compassion for a grieving family, it's infuriating.
Come on, there's the trajectory of the bullet that's not consistent with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. There's evidence of blood cleanup in the bathroom, but no trace of blood on Donna's hands that suggests she didn't clean up the bathroom. Donna was completely nude except for the small t-shirt.
She would not have been found in the condition she was in. If it would have been suicide, she would have prepped herself.
Now, on the other hand, we also know she was struggling financially. She had some posts on Facebook that she was very depressed and felt lonely. She threatened suicide in the past. But if we remove all those predetermining factors, what was there on scene to make...
Nothing. There was absolutely nothing on scene that would have told me it was a suicide or any other detective.
But what does the Washington Parish Sheriff's Office get out of protecting the killer or kind of just sweeping it off as a suicide?
My guess, he knows something about someone. Because let me tell you something. Arsenal was known to have information on all the cops. And he wasn't afraid to use it.
Can't look it in the eye.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 1. Now that you're up to speed with a big picture view of the case, starting in episode 2, we're going to dive into the dirty little secrets that surround Donna's death. I was shocked by what we uncovered. I have a feeling you will be too, so I'll see you then. Head over to freezeframepodcast.com for behind-the-scenes details on the investigation, and then follow us on socials at freezeframepod for exclusive content. Freeze Frame is a Buttwise Media production. It's written and produced by me, Tucker Simmons, editing and post-production by Evan Dizonier, narration by Greg Geringer and Carrie Lauren, and our original music is Something Strange by Tabitha Meeks.